Baltic is probably the greatest repository of information for the archaeology of previous millennia. Because of the preservative qualities of water that is for most of the year quite low temperature, and it also is very low salinity. So this means that a lot of the organisms that would eat the wood and other organic material in other parts of the world, they don't survive, they don't live in the Baltic. This ship was built and used just at the time when the whole of ship technology in Northern Europe is changing, where the whole of the European world is moving from the medieval period to what we call modernity. And everything from social attitudes, religion, politics, militarism, and of course shipbuilding was changing. So this ship manifests all those things in one site. The technology is there, the military weapons are there, and aspects of the society on board are there. When it was discovered, it was thought to be Lübske Swan, the Swan of Lübeck, the flagship of the fleet bought by Gustav Eriksson Vasa in his campaign to rid the Danes from what is now southern Sweden. The Swan was the biggest and most expensive ship in that fleet. And because of the historical writers of the 19th century, they looked at the original sources and they compressed what they wrote from those sources, and they gave the impression that the Swan wrecked up here. Because the ship hit the stones probably quite fast, 3 or 4 knots maybe, it hit it so violently that the ship broke essentially down the chine on either side. Part of the structure went to one side of Franska Stennerne and lies in relatively shallow water. The majority of the hull rolled down the slope, and it came to rest on essentially a precipitous rock ledge at about 30 metres. And it slopes down there to about 40 metres, and half of the ship is overhanging this sheer drop down to a level of about 50 metres. So you see essentially a ship opened out like a flower. You can see the deck beams, both sides of the hull structure, the ballast, which is what would have stabilised the ship, and on the ballast are this great pile of great guns that Gustav Vasa had recovered from the Swan and was sending back to Stockholm. It's probably the biggest collection of wrought iron guns that is known in the world from this period. Even though this ship is broken up, it still has a massive amount of data that we can survey without having to dig it up from the seabed. Elsewhere in the world, if a ship of this period survives, it only survives because it is completely buried in the sediment, which means that it's very hard to find, and even if you do find it, you've then got to spend millions of pounds getting into the seabed to excavate it. In fact, we now know that the Swan was abandoned in Öland, and they took off all the guns and equipment from the Swan and put them on another of Gustav Vasa's ships. And in 1525, after his campaign against Baron von Mielen down in Kalmar, he loaded all this equipment onto the ship, sailed it north to Stockholm, and it's that ship that sunk.